Some stories are so dark they make even history tremble. In 1839, Louisiana, amid the sweltering heat of the plantations, one woman's name became a whispered curse, a slave whose beauty masked a heart filled with rage and bloodlust. They said she killed not out of fear, but out of pleasure. Her tale was buried, erased, and feared for generations. Tonight, we uncover the truth behind Louisiana's deadliest slave woman, a story that blurs the line between madness and revenge. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And make sure to subscribe to the channel, because every story I share comes from deep historical research, rare records, and hours spent uncovering the darkest corners of real history. The Louisiana of 1839 was a world drenched in both beauty and brutality. The land was lush, endless fields of sugarcane swaying under a burning sun, but that beauty was built on pain. Every inch of those fields had been watered by the sweat, tears, and blood of enslaved people forced to labor under the cruelest conditions imaginable. The plantations were empires of control, where human beings were reduced to property, and every act of defiance was met with punishment so severe it broke both body and spirit. It was in this world, suffocating under heat, violence, and fear, that a young enslaved woman was born, unknown to history by name, but remembered through the terror she left behind. From the moment she could walk, her life was dictated by the whip. She was owned, traded, and commanded like livestock. Her body bore scars from beatings, her back marked by lashes that never healed properly. On the plantation, cruelty was routine. The overseer's voice was law, and even the smallest mistake, spilling water, slowing down, or speaking without permission, could lead to punishment. Food was scarce, rest even rarer, and the constant fear of being sold away from family members kept most enslaved people silent and obedient. But she was different. Those who worked alongside her often whispered that there was something strange in her eyes, a calmness, almost emotionless, even when others cried or screamed. It wasn't defiance. It was detachment, as if her mind had already gone somewhere darker than pain itself. The plantation owner's house, where she was often forced to serve, represented another kind of hell. The master and his wife treated her as both servant and object, someone to be used, commanded, and humiliated. Many enslaved women faced the same fate, enduring violence behind closed doors, their suffering unseen and unspoken. This endless abuse, both physical and psychological, created a quiet rage within her. To the outside world, she appeared obedient, calm, even polite. But inside, something had begun to fracture. Years of cruelty had turned her pain into something colder, something that didn't cry anymore. As she grew older, the plantation began to change around her. The enslaved men and women she knew were sold, beaten, or killed. The overseer grew harsher, and whispers of revolt or escape were punished with public torture meant to instill fear in the rest. Yet she no longer feared anything. It was as if her emotions had burned away completely, leaving only a strange, hollow stillness. She worked quietly, did what she was told. But her gaze, sharp, unblinking, made even the cruelest overseer uneasy. This was the world that shaped her, the relentless violence, the unbearable oppression, the stripping away of every ounce of humanity. Most people broke under it. Some survived. But she changed. The plantation was a factory of monsters, but it didn't just create those in power. It also created her. What began as suffering hardened into something darker than despair. Those who remembered her said that she never smiled, never wept, and never showed fear. And in the cruelest corners of that Louisiana plantation, where whips cracked and cries echoed into the fields, no one yet realized that one of the enslaved had stopped being afraid of death. By the late summer of 1839, strange things began to happen on the plantation. Accidents, disappearances, quiet deaths that were never spoken of. But long before the killings began, before her name became a whispered legend, the groundwork for her transformation had already been laid. Louisiana's beauty had hidden the rot beneath it, and in that rot, in the heart of human cruelty, something monstrous had been born. The change in her did not happen overnight. It crept in slowly, like a shadow lengthening across the fields at dusk. For years, she had endured everything. The backbreaking labor, the screams of those punished beside her, the master's cruelty that knew no end. Every day chipped away a little more of her humanity until only a shell remained. But there was one night, one event, that broke what was left of her restraint, and it was from that moment that the woman everyone thought they knew disappeared, replaced by something far colder and far more dangerous. No one remembered exactly what triggered it. Some said it began when the plantation owner's wife accused her of stealing a silver comb and ordered her to be whipped until she confessed. Others whispered that the master had forced himself on her again and again until something in her finally snapped. Whatever the cause, that night she stopped crying. The tears that had once fallen silently on her straw mat were gone. She lay awake staring into the darkness, her breathing calm, her mind strangely clear. For the first time in her life, she realized that she no longer felt fear, not of the whip, not of the master, not of death. The realization brought a kind of stillness, a silence that terrified anyone who looked into her eyes. After that night, she changed in ways that unsettled everyone. She became quieter but sharper, her movements deliberate, her words few but pointed. When the overseer shouted, she didn't flinch. When the other enslaved people cried, she didn't comfort them. She simply watched. The other slaves began to keep their distance. They said she had gone hollow inside, that her soul had slipped away, leaving behind something that looked human but wasn't. Yet beneath that eerie calm, a storm was building. All the humiliation, all the torture, all the years of being treated like an object had crystallized into a single, burning emotion: revenge. She started to notice things differently. She paid attention to the routines of the master's house, the way the overseer locked his room at night, where the kitchen knives were kept. Her silence gave her power. No one noticed her, no one suspected her, and in a world where she had always been powerless, that invisibility became her greatest weapon. To those around her, she was still just another tired servant. But inside, she was plotting something the world had never seen before, a rebellion not of armies, but of one woman who had stopped caring about survival. The first to sense the danger was another house slave, an older woman who had known her since childhood. She said she could see it in her eyes, something empty yet burning. One evening she tried to talk to her, to remind her that God still watched over them, that there was still hope. The younger woman just looked at her and said softly, "God watched and he did nothing." After that, she walked away, leaving the older woman trembling. From that moment, the mask she wore slipped further each day. She began to take pleasure in small acts of rebellion, burning food on purpose, breaking plates, staring directly into the master's eyes when he tried to humiliate her. It wasn't open defiance. It was something subtler, darker. She was testing the limits, learning how far she could go before anyone realized what she was truly capable of. The moment she snapped wasn't marked by screams or fury. It came quietly, one humid night when the air felt thick enough to choke on. She realized that no one was coming to save her, that her pain, her rage, her existence meant nothing to those who owned her. And in that stillness, she made a decision that would change everything. If the world saw her as less than human, she would stop pretending to be one. What began as a need to survive had transformed into something else entirely. She no longer wanted to endure. She wanted to make others feel what she had felt for years, to turn fear into her language and death into her form of justice. From that point forward, the woman who had once been a victim began her quiet descent into darkness. The plantation had created her torment, but now it would face the monster it had made. The killings began without warning, and at first no one believed they were connected. Life on the plantation was already cruel and unpredictable. People died from exhaustion, disease, or the overseer's hand every day. But there was something different about these deaths. They were quiet, deliberate, and strangely calculated. The first victim, was a field hand who had once mocked her after a whipping. He was found face down near the water barrel, his neck broken cleanly as if by accident. No one saw it happen, and no one questioned it. Death was common, after all. But the older slaves noticed the way she stood nearby, expressionless, watching the men carry the body away without saying a word. Soon after, another death followed. This time it was the overseer's young assistant, a man known for his cruelty. He was found in the barn, his throat slit with a blade from the kitchen. Panic spread quietly among the slaves, though few dared to speak aloud. Some whispered that a curse had fallen over the plantation. Others believed a spirit had come to punish the wicked. But deep down, a few suspected the truth, that it wasn't a ghost haunting the fields, but one of their own. As days passed, her demeanor never changed. She moved through the plantation as she always had, calm, obedient, silent. But her eyes told a different story. There was no remorse there, no fear, only a cold satisfaction. She had learned to kill, as naturally as she had learned to survive. At night, when the others prayed for mercy, she sat apart, sharpening tools or staring into the fire. Those who saw her said she didn't blink much anymore, as if she had drifted somewhere far beyond the reach of human emotion. Her next target was the master's wife, a woman who had tormented her from childhood, beating her for the smallest mistakes, forcing her to work even when she was sick. The mistress's sudden illness puzzled the doctor who was summoned from a nearby parish. She grew weak, delirious, her skin turning pale as if poisoned. No one suspected the quiet servant who tended her bedside, spooning medicine into her mouth with steady hands and a faint, unreadable smile. Within a week, the mistress was dead, and the master, blinded by grief and arrogance, never once questioned the one person who remained by his side. The murders continued, always disguised as accidents or illness. The plantation's dogs were poisoned, a stable hand vanished, and a foreman was found dead in his sleep. The more bodies appeared, the more paranoid the surviving white workers became. The master increased punishments, accusing innocent slaves of witchcraft, rebellion, or theft. He'd never imagined that the true source of his nightmare stood only a few feet away, quietly watching him unravel. Her methods grew bolder. She had discovered a kind of thrill in control, a sense of power she had never known before. Killing no longer frightened her, it fascinated her. The act itself became a ritual, a secret rebellion that made her feel alive in a world built to crush her spirit. Each death was, to her mind, an act of balance, a way to repay cruelty with its own medicine. But beneath that twisted sense of justice, there was also something darker, a hunger that could no longer be satisfied. The other slaves began to fear her more than the overseer. They avoided her path, refusing to meet her gaze. Some prayed for her soul. Others prayed that she would never notice them. There were whispers that she had made a pact with death itself, that she was no longer entirely human. Even those who admired her courage stayed silent, afraid to become her next victim. By the end of that summer, the plantation had turned into a place of quiet terror. No one trusted anyone, and no one dared to speak her name aloud. The killings had changed everything. The master grew paranoid, the slaves grew fearful, and the once orderly rhythm of work and punishment collapsed into chaos. But through it all, she remained untouched, blending into the background like a ghost in daylight. The woman who had once been powerless had become a force that no one could control. And though no one could prove it, everyone on that cursed Louisiana plantation knew one thing for certain. She had learned to love what she did, and she wasn't done yet. By the fall of 1839, fear had settled over the plantation like a heavy fog. The deaths had gone from whispered suspicion to undeniable horror. The master's house, once filled with arrogant laughter and music, now echoed with tension. Workers refused to enter the kitchen alone. Overseers slept with weapons at their sides, and even the dogs, once fierce, cowered and whimpered through the night. Something evil had taken root, and though no one could see it, they all felt it. At the center of it all stood the same quiet woman, calm as ever. her hands stained with neither blood nor guilt in anyone's eyes but her own. Her power came not from brute strength or rebellion, but from the fear she planted in the hearts of others. People began to vanish without explanation, their absence noted only in passing. A field worker disappeared after making a crude joke about her, and a driver was found hanging from the rafters of the tool shed. The master's paranoia deepened with every new body, but he refused to leave his estate. His pride bound him there, convinced that the chaos around him was a curse sent by jealous rivals or restless spirits. In truth, the spirit haunting his land was the one who prepared his meals each evening and served him wine with her eyes lowered. She had become a master of deception. Her words were few, her steps quiet, her face unreadable. To anyone who looked at her, she was the picture of obedience, a woman beaten into submission, still doing her duty while others fell apart. But behind those calm eyes was a calculating mind, watching, planning, and savoring every moment of the master's unraveling. She didn't rush her vengeance. She let it breathe, letting terror do the work that her hands didn't need to. She began to leave small traces. A torn piece of cloth near a victim's bed, a misplaced object, a whisper carried through the fields. It was psychological warfare, and it worked. Soon the master trusted no one. He lashed out at his workers, his family, even his overseers. His world was collapsing, and she was its architect. The line between justice and madness blurred inside her. What began as vengeance had become obsession. The rush of power she felt each time someone died was like a drug, a relief from years of humiliation. She began to crave the moment, the fear in their eyes, the silence that followed, the knowledge that she had finally taken back control. But control, once tasted, demanded more. Each death brought temporary satisfaction, followed by an emptiness that demanded another act, another victim. It was no longer about revenge. It was about feeding something dark that had grown inside her. One night, a young enslaved girl witnessed her in the act, saw her standing over a dying overseer, her face calm, her hands steady. The girl froze in terror, unsure if she was next. Instead of silencing her, the woman simply placed a finger to her lips and said, "You didn't see nothing." The child nodded, tears streaming down her face, and ran. From that night on, she never spoke again. The story of what she'd seen spread anyway, not through words, but through the fear that clung to every breath on the plantation. Everyone now knew that the killer was among them, and that it was her. When the truth finally began to dawn on the master, it was too late. His estate was crumbling, his workers gone, his wealth fading. He confronted her one evening in the kitchen, demanding to know if she was responsible. She looked at him with a calm so unnerving that he faltered. Then for the first time she smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a chill through his bones. "You made me this way," she whispered. "You taught me what pain is. Now I'm teaching you." That night the main house burned. When the flames were finally extinguished, only ashes remained. Among the ruins, they found charred bones. Some said they belonged to the master, others claimed she had perished too. But those who had known her, who had seen the glint in her eyes before everything fell apart, believed differently. They said she escaped, vanishing into the swamps with the smoke still rising behind her. And from that night on, stories spread through Louisiana's parishes, of a dark figure seen wandering near the bayous, of men found dead in their sleep, their throats marked by unseen hands. Some said she had become a ghost, others said she lived on, hunting those who carried the same cruelty she once endured. Whether human or spirit, her legend grew into a warning whispered among slaves and masters alike. Never underestimate the wrath of the broken, for they can become the deadliest of all. In the years that followed, her name became a ghost story, one that traveled across the parishes of Louisiana, whispered by slaves in the fields and murmured by masters behind locked doors. The fires of the plantation had long gone cold, but her legend refused to die. They called her many things: the woman with the devil's eyes, the silent flame, the kitchen witch. Some said she still roamed the swamps, living among the reeds and alligators. surviving off the land and slipping into plantations under the cover of night to claim new victims. Others swore she was no longer human at all, that death had rejected her, sending her back to walk the earth as vengeance incarnate. The truth, however, was stranger than the myth. Years after the destruction of the plantation, reports began to surface in nearby towns of mysterious killings that mirrored the same brutal precision of her earlier acts. Victims were found with the same marks, the same eerie stillness in death. Authorities blamed runaway slaves, outlaws, or bandits, but those who had seen her once knew better. The pattern was unmistakable. Wherever cruelty thrived, wherever a whip cracked too often or a scream echoed unanswered, death followed shortly after. It was as if she could sense suffering, drawn to it like a shadow drawn to the setting sun. Her story became a symbol of both fear and defiance. For the enslaved, she represented something terrifying, yet strangely empowering. A woman who had turned her torment into power, who had fought back in a world that crushed everyone else into submission. To the white masters, however, she was the embodiment of their greatest fear. Rebellion born from within, a servant who had learned to use their own tools against them. Her name became forbidden, never spoken aloud near the dinner tables or in church pews. But among the enslaved, mothers told their children her story in hushed tones, not as a warning but as a reminder that even in chains there were those who found ways to fight. With each retelling, her story evolved. Some said she became a sort of folk spirit, appearing to those on the brink of despair. They claimed she whispered to women beaten by their masters, urging them to endure or to act. Others believed she haunted the wicked, visiting overseers and masters in their sleep, her face appearing in the darkness before their hearts stopped beating. The more the story spread, the less it mattered whether she had survived in flesh or in memory. Her name had become eternal, a curse carved into Louisiana's history. Years later, when emancipation finally came, freed men and women revisited the ruins of that once grand plantation. The earth had reclaimed it, vines twisting around the stone chimneys, the fields now quiet and overgrown. But in the ashes, someone had scratched words into a surviving stone slab. "We are not afraid anymore." Some believed it was her doing, her final message to the world that had once enslaved her. Even scholars who studied her case decades later struggled to separate fact from legend. They uncovered records of a woman matching her description, an enslaved cook who vanished after a fire in 1839, but the trail ended there. No arrest, no body, no grave, just silence. Historians debated whether she had truly committed the murders or whether the story had been twisted by plantation gossip into something more monstrous. But among the people whose ancestors lived through it, there was no doubt. They said her spirit never left Louisiana, that she had become a part of its soil, its water, its air. In the end, her legacy became more than that of a killer. It became a mirror reflecting the madness of her time. She was the product of a world built on suffering, a woman who had learned violence from those who used it to control her. Her descent into bloodlust was the echo of the cruelty that had shaped her. And though history would remember her as the deadliest slave woman in Louisiana, there were those who believed her story was not one of evil, but of transformation, a soul so deeply wounded that it broke the boundary between humanity and monstrosity. Even now, some say that on still, humid nights in the Louisiana swamps, you can hear her humming a lullaby she once sang while cooking, a tune soft and haunting, carried on the wind. And if you listen closely, the old folks warn, you'll feel her eyes on you, cold, watchful, unblinking. Not because she seeks vengeance anymore, but because she's making sure the world never forgets what turned her into what she became.